Hi, everyone. Leslie M. Thornton, Hypnosis for Permanent Weight Loss. Today's episode, really excited to bring it to you today. It's so vital. It's so vital. It's called taking responsibility, taking 100% responsibility. So, what do I mean by that? Well, first, I'll share a story that for myself, taking responsibility. When someone would say that about taking responsibility, it was very tied into it's my fault or something's wrong, or I did something wrong, or I need to take the blame, something of that flavor or caliber. And it was confronting for me. And I may have told this story before, but for myself, most of the time, I am like a yes, I want to do anything that has to do with self development, transformation, especially if it just resonates with where I'm at on my path. And so I was taking a communication course. And one of the things that they were talking about was around taking responsibility. And I was confronted. I was very much confronted. And what that looked like was me kind of like deer in the headlights, not really myself, feeling exhausted, feeling tired, which to me are all the signs of the fact that my subconscious probably needs to hear it really more, but it's like actually afraid that if it hears it, then it's going to actually die, combust. All its survival mechanisms will be lost. And so I caught my pattern when I was not wanting to even say the words about I take responsibility. And what I discovered in that was because I had this deep belief that I, as a human being, was fundamentally something was wrong, that there was something wrong with me and that there was something very broken about me. And so I was spending my entire life working so hard to prove that there wasn't something wrong, that I wasn't broken. Right. And I've shared many times before about how I grew up in a family that were all in the medical profession. And so it's constantly a world of what's wrong instead of a world of, well, let's look at the bright side. Let's see how the fact that X, Y, and Z happened meant that you actually did a great job. It was like, you know, as soon as something happens, it's just what's wrong. Okay. So even if I'm trying to think of an example, oh, well, with my, of course, with my food and body stuff, right? So it was like as a little kid, started putting on some weight, whatever. And then it's like, what's wrong? Instead of the mindset of being like, okay, cool. Like, what's right about that? Maybe she's comfortable in her body, or I don't know. There could be so many other takes on it than just what's wrong, right? Like problem diagnosis. Just like, oh, that's what's happening. That's wrong. So we need to fix that problem, right? And it's just like we live in this diagnose, fix. And it works, right? It totally works to be somebody who's out there in the world diagnosing and fixing stuff. It makes amazing medical professionals and engineers and every profession, right? We need to use our mind and problem solve and critically think about this and that and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not discounting the part of our minds that need to problem solve. But what I am saying is that when you come from that mindset of problem, when it is that you're identifying yourself, so I as a human being I am wrong, I am fundamentally bad or evil or broken or damaged. When you have a belief like that going on deep down for whatever reason that it ended up in your psyche, you go throughout life working so hard the same way that I did to try to prove to everyone that you are right, that you are worthy of being alive, that you are the opposite of bad, that you are the best, perfect person in the world, whatever that looks like to you. And it's exhausting. I was just having a conversation with a colleague earlier today, and she was saying how, with her industry, she's a fitness coach, that she is constantly having to make sure that she is always in the middle of the road. when it comes to different, issues or conflicts or whatever, like she just needs to always hyper focus and make sure that she doesn't turn anybody off with anything that she's saying, which completely, and I said, listen, I understand the professionality of all of these types of things and whatever, but I said, but what you're talking about as far as making sure that you never basically allow yourself to be a human while you're at work or while you're talking with clients, and there's so many fears that were under there, right? She was like, I'm afraid of making anybody feel bad, and I'm afraid of you know whatever, all these different things. And again, it was like two different buckets, like professionality and making sure that and things are done with integrity and we're being respectful and mindful of everybody's different ways of being or belief systems, this kind of stuff. Like, that's one thing. But you're having to always be exhausted and never being able to be a human in front of your clients at all. Like, really? Like, that's exhausting. Okay, so coming from this place of fix, right? We just have these parts of ourselves that won't allow ourselves to actually be free. Now, so for myself, when it comes to taking responsibility, my access to freedom was to learn that I had it messed up in my mind, where instead of my behaviors or my actions or my words could have been maybe not the best, right? That could cause me to make a mistake or have something go out of integrity or out of alignment. Like, that's possible because I'm a human being that is learning and growing and changing and developing every day, right? With a commitment to always learn from her mistakes and all this kind of stuff. But that was different than who I am as a human being, can never be wrong. I am innocent, right? I am so innocent the same way that you are, right? So if you're listening to this podcast, like the innocence of, trying so hard to lose weight and not being able to, the innocence of having, stress get the best of you. And then so you resort to food because you literally don't know a different way. You don't know a different way. It's not your fault. But when you have this belief that I am fundamentally bad and wrong, and then there's the opportunity to take full responsibility, you can't do it because it's like then you're outing yourself that basically you can go to HE double hockey sticks because you're so bad that why would we even have you on this planet? It's extreme, but that's the way that our subconscious feels and thinks. It's that extreme. Right. So then once I got the difference of being like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, like there's nothing bad about me, I can be unconditionally loved and forgiven and accepted no matter what mistake that I make, because I always have the best intentions. I'm never trying to do something horrible to anyone or in any situation in my life. But I had to get that because who I was being was someone that was bad and wrong. And it was terrifying to live in that space, because I constantly was terrified of making a mistake and like, when's the next shoe going to drop? Because then I'm going to completely be lost. So when I started being able to do that, I take responsibility for the fact that I said the wrong thing. And I want to let you know that I am terribly sorry about that. It might have made you feel really bad. And I want to let you know that I'm 100% committed to always saying words that make you feel good. Right? It's like I was able to acknowledge that. And then relationships started to move in my life, because I was just simply able to take ownership for the fact that, hey, I'm not perfect over here. And I get that. And I don't want to be that way. And I don't want to cause that situation at all. And here's what I'm going to do. And then always do that thing. That's what makes an incredibly admirable human being. It is so powerful when you get to take 100% responsibility for every aspect of your life. Right? So letting go of the blame game. Well, my parents were like this, my, my upbringing was like this, my schooling was like this, my siblings were like that. It's just not a powerful way to be. it doesn't mean that those horrible things didn't happen to you. They did, if they did, right? Or whatever circumstances. We all can find things about our past that because of that X, Y, and Z not so good thing showed up in our adult lives. We can all relate to that. And what I'm saying is that when you don't take 100% ownership for who you are today, it's like, great. And your past is your past. And now this is who you are today. What are you going to do about it? Right? Because the truth is that if we're not complete with our past over here, then what's going to show up when we're working over here is we're not actually going to be able to move forward as becoming our best versions of ourselves. It's just, you're just pointing fingers and never having to look inward because maybe it's too painful for you to do that. Or maybe it feels scary to let go of those grudges because then you feel like then you're giving up or you're letting go, right? Or you're letting that other person, quote unquote, win. And you've been raising your, what's the right thing to do in the way to be flag, right? And again, I'm not saying that that's not, that people couldn't really be served by learning better, nicer ways to be and communicate. I'm not saying that. But the truth is, we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. So when you take 100% ownership for your life, what would that be like for if you took 100% ownership for your life? Everything that's happening in your life right now, everything that's not happening in your life right now, right? If you've been stuck in food, body, weight prison your whole life, taking 100% ownership for the fact that it's still that way. It's like, I am on some level choosing to stay in this prison if I'm not readily taking action right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to choose to stay in the struggle, then stay in the struggle. Right? If you are in a job that you don't like, taking 100% ownership for the fact that you're staying at the job. It's like, oh, well, but I have to because my family would go broke and XYZ would happen without it. All of these considerations and justifications come in. You're still choosing to stay. There's plenty of people and plenty of stories where it made total sense not to go because of circumstances, but they went anyway. You can, if there's no handcuffs happening on your wrist, then you technically can go. So like it's just feels it's a whole different shift when you're like, I am choosing to stay. When I was working as a nurse and couldn't stand working as a nurse anymore, I was at the end of my rope with it. Right. And it was so hard for me because it was like, I know that I want to go, but I'm too scared to stay. And something that a coach of mine said at the time was, trust yourself that you'll know what time when it's time to actually go. And until then, trust that whatever is happening along the way is here to support you and teach you and get you ready for the next part of your path. Best thing anyone could have said to me. So amazing. And you know what? That day did come. I was sitting in meditation. I was new to meditation and just got this big download throughout my body. It just felt like a voice, like if a voice had a feel, it felt like that. It was like, thy will be done. And the next day I wrote my month-long notice and brought it to the nurse manager and put in my notice. And I knew with 100% certainty that that was the day for me. Right. But it was months, it's probably a full year of working as a nurse that every day I had to read spiritual texts. I was meditating. I was nervous every night before going to bed because I was panicked about going to work the next day. There was just so many things. It was just very hard. There's so much pressure at work, working in the ICU, and just right. I was young and just hadn't built in some of these communication skills and stuff that I needed to take some of that stress off. And it just was overwhelming. And it was not the time for me to stay. Not a good fit for me. And I'm happy it happened. But taking 100% ownership for the fact that if you're in a situation that you don't really like to have, if you're not taking action to get out of it, then choose your situation and find whatever great thing is happening from that thing. When you take 100% ownership for everything that's happening, everything that's not happening, everything starts to open up in your life, right? Versus not being able to do that, and know that there's so much compassion and so much empathy, right? I know how triggering and confronting it can be to even say the words about taking responsibility, or even imagining that maybe it was you had 100% responsibility for the last relationship that ended in your life to end, right? And they had 100% responsibility for the relationship ending as well. Right? And from that place, you both have something that you can work on and you can compromise from, because it's like, yeah, I know that I missed the ball in this way. Yes, I know I missed the ball in this way. And they may never see that. You may never see that, but I hope after listening to this podcast that you can start to actually see that. A life of taking 100% responsibility is awesome. It's really awesome. So I want to invite you to try that on. What are you not taking responsibility for? And then if you know that you're responsible for it, right? Especially when it comes to the food, body, and weight thing of like, you've been listening to this podcast for how long, right? You know that you struggle. You know that maybe this podcast helps you. I used to listen to podcasts too, and it'd be like, oh, like it just makes me feel good, just to hear that person's voice every day. And like now I'm feeling a little bit better in the moment. But there's a difference between just feeling better and putting a band-aid on and actually doing the deep inner work that actually pulls it all apart and gets you past your triggers fast. Right? So if you're not taking 100% ownership or taking action to get out of this mess, then own the fact that you want to stay in it. And know that that's totally supported as well. But don't be complaining on the outside about how you can't figure out this weight thing, right? Because the only person getting in your way is you. I love you, and I'll see you next week.